There's a lot of themes that we see constantly come up that we know are active problems, but not with a lot of good solutions. And to talk about that, I want to bring on Cami to really go into the article and a talk she gave about a couple months ago. And we're going to dig into all the things that we think are not really working well in our ecosystem and how we can potentially fix them. So without further ado, please welcome her on stage. I'm super excited to have you here again. You've been part of almost every time we've been in this city and been a supporter of what we've done since the beginning.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. You guys are, one of my favorites. So
well, thank you, and I love the Defiant because that's literally how I keep up with what's actually seen in this space.
Okay.
So a lot of what we're going to talk about will likely be controversial from the point of view of just pointing out the obvious. So I want to set the stage on just making sure people know this is happening, and what I'll do is I'll kind of mostly have you cover a lot of the things that you talked about, but we'll sort of go into depth here. So a big piece of what we've seen in this industry over the last decade is, yes, we want decentralization. Yes, we want things to work, but at the same time, we know that in some cases, things are not at the place where they want to be with respect to one-to-one feature parity on how the experience should be, to how certain guarantees should be made on how you use a different protocol. It's just like a massive dichotomy between what you want and what the reality is. And I think that's kind of what you meant to cover with your article. So my kind of first question to you is, can you just give us a very brief overview of what some of these high-level problems were, what you noticed, and kind of what made you write that? And then we can just list out all the types of theater and the drama we've seen in this space, and we'll kind of go deeper into each of them one by one.
Sure. So I'll give a context to my motivation, and it's so I gave this talk at ETC in Paris called "Crypto is a Theater," and it goes over all the different facades that I see going up, and it's not so much that there were all these promises and we're not there yet, because that's understandable. It's about putting on the show. That's what it just like started really kind of getting to me, because it's okay to admit we're not there yet, but I don't think it's okay to not be transparent about it, especially because there's money involved, and people are trusting these protocols and developers, so those risks need to be more transparent and better known. And so these different theater performances that I'm seeing are decentralization theater, governance theater, community theater, and DeFi musical chairs, or like TVL musical chairs. And I can,
These are excellent headaches. I can't wait to get a jump in. So let's talk about the decentralization theater. How do you define decentralization, and kind of where do you think people are sort of not being honest about something being decentralized?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the level of control that projects have over their protocol. And in the end, obviously the space is very, very early, and most teams have really almost full control over their protocols. It's about how a small group of people in one room can unilaterally make upgrades to code without there having be any almost input from token holders or anything else. It's this kind of God mode switch that protocols have, and this is going on in most cases, from like dApp levels to layer 2 levels, and it's really important. There's hundreds of millions of dollars at stake that can easily be put at risk by a very, very small group of people. And so that's important because, one, for regulatory reasons, that's just like top of mind right now. Regulators can easily come and censor or stop a protocol if it can be easily upgraded by a small
Only a few people, yeah.
And also just obviously puts user funds at risk. And we've seen many cases where there's some seed phrase, compromise, and millions of dollars are lost. And thirdly, if we're here to be the future of finance, the future of the internet, which I do believe is the case, there's no way that institutions, like the trillions of dollars that flow through the financial system, are going to trust this infrastructure when, again, it can be upgraded by a handful of people. There's no way we're building the future of finance in the right way if this is what's behind it. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Do you in this situation consider the cases where certain people have a massive amount of tokens and they're still using that to vote for a decision on these DAOs, or is it purely the fact that some people or some protocols are unilaterally just making decisions without actually obeying how they?
Yeah, it's like the degree of control via different tools. Like some of it will be through these upgrade switches. Some of it will be through governance. Some of it will be through having a very centralized network with very few validators or very few nodes. So yeah, there's like different ways of controlling a DApp or a protocol.
Understood. So obviously that's not a good place to be in if your hard-earned money can just be put in a different direction or wiped away from just a handful of people making decisions on the whim. What is a kind of good way for us to identify these situations? Like, do you have a proposal or a way to understand if something is in that theater category for being decentralized?
Yeah. Like maybe I can go through the other types of theater and then
absolutely, sure,
we can go into like the.
So let's talk about governance theater.
Okay. So all right. So governance theater is similar, but it's about how ineffective token-based governance is right now. Effectively, what's happening is that governance tokens are basically a proxy for equity. I mean, that's what people are really using governance tokens for. Like, if you're buying a token, you're not. Most of the time, nobody's interested in actually governing a protocol.
They just want to own the token.
They just want a piece of the whatever that is the token. And the way that we see it objectively is because in the end, it's like the teams and their investors, the ones who are participating in governance and driving all decisions. So there was a study a couple of years ago that showed that 1% of token holders of the major DeFi applications own more than 50% of governance or like delegated governance votes. I mean, that's 1%.
That's a massive variance.
Yeah. So obviously, token-based governance is not working, and it's creating this horrible system of plutocracy where it's, even if it was working, the way it's set up, it's set up so that effectively, those who have the most capital have the bigger say. So, I think,
one token, one vote isn't really a good strategy if it's already unfairly distributed.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of this governance theater, and it's a theater because, like, if you know that your DApp is being run by a small group of people, don't put on this show of like going to like Snapshot and being like, oh, we have community governance, like we'll put up this proposal, when you know that you're going to control it. Like, you have 99% of the votes. You're going to say yes or no. So this really gets to me. It's like, just make your decision. Just run this DApp, like a startup, like you are. And when you have like greater distribution in your token, then maybe set up an actual decentralized governance. But don't do it now. It's like you're wasting everyone's time.
So in this case, instead of governance theater, it's better to actually move it back to decentralization theater.
Yeah. My whole point is like, there's nothing wrong about being centralized at first. Like,
yeah,
you're running a startup effectively. You want to become decentralized. You can't do it on day one. So just be transparent about it.
Don't put up the show if you already know what the outcome is going to be.
Yes, don't put up the show. It's it's offensive for those watching. And then community theater, it's this is mostly kind of my criticism of like how the whole NFT space developed, which has become so cringe to me. It's like this always talk about community. In the end, like there's very few authentic, real NFT communities. Most of them, they're about like creating these like fake exclusivity.
Discord is not a community.
Yeah, Discord is not a community. And having like a bunch of people saying kind of when announcement, when partnership, when whatever, to like have some sort of price movement. That's not a community either. And what happens is like a lot of like founders and influencers like to go on about, oh, like we love the community, but then like they do a rug pull, or like they like abandon the project and go on to the next thing. And there's like so many cases of this. So I think it's just like very, I don't know, immoral to just like play on this high lofty goal of having a community and like, oh no, we're here for the art, and no, you're here for the money, and like you can be transparent about it. So yeah, that's my gripe with NFTs. And then finally, DeFi musical chairs. In the end, like DeFi, it's my thing. Like I love it. I love the promise of it. Again, like I do think this is the future of finance. I think this is the way where we can create a more open, global, transparent financial system.
And by the way, for those of you who don't know, that's why it's called the Defiant. That's the DeFi.
So, but right now, unfortunately, what's happening is DeFi is this this game of musical chairs where like money is being cycled around the same group of people who are chasing the best yield. And there's no new money coming in. So, each protocol is trying to offer, the best incentive to fight for the smallish amount of capital that's available. So, it's kind of a disappointing state of things. But I have like my caveats with this part of like the facade. But to go like, now that like we've gone over the theater, there's no like one magic solution. I think there's a lot to do here. Like I think governance is like just like one very hard thing to solve. I think there needs to be better design systems around this, and maybe identity is like the key piece missing.
But also, like, not every model will work for every project. It's going to have to be different to that need of that community.
Yeah, so I think it's like with governance, it's like basically we're again like super early. There needs to be better systems designed, but like about just like coming with one part of the solution, because again, like it won't be like a magic wand. Actually, after the ETHC talk, I started really kind of thinking about all of this and about, like, okay, I'm like mad that this is happening, but I should also be doing something about it. So I think this is the first time I'm publicly speaking, but I'm putting together something called the DeFi League, which will consist on a group of founders, thought leaders, researchers in DeFi to advocate for transparency.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we have a data partner here who will help put up a dashboard of metrics to help users just very clearly assess where the risks are. So this is just very early stages. I've just been talking to like the members of this group, but we have like some really strong names on board. And the idea is, we'll get together, put up this like transparent, objective methodology. Think of like LTV for regulators.
Yeah.
But for DeFi, to have this like very like easy to scan place, and see kind of, okay, like where the risks are, what like what level of decentralization.
Just the one solution being casual public shaming.
Sorry?
just casually publicly shaming some of these protocols for putting up these.
No. Again, like there's like no judgment on like being centralized. Again, like I think that's totally fair, but it's just like, let's be open about it. Let's disclose the risk, and users can make their decision. I think it's perfectly fine to use a centralized.
Absolutely.
Application.
Sorry, I was just joking.
Yeah, first.
I think the outcome that you kind of pointed out from everything you've said and I've already previously talked about is that it should be about the transparency that these things are happening instead of trying to hide it behind some other sort of goal. My kind of bigger question is, as you were looking into sort of understanding what's going on here, did you kind of get a good idea for why people put up with this type of theater?
Yeah, and I think it's a good reason. I don't think anyone is being like intentionally just like deceiving. But to me, I don't know. I think it's pretty clear. It's the regulatory risk. I think that's the main reason why a lot of the design choices in DeFi happen in the first place. So I think like anons, DAOs, like fee switches, like all of these things, valueless tokens. I mean, come on. All of these things, like it's maybe, part of it is like, okay, you're cypherpunk, but I think in many cases it's because you're trying to avoid
because of lack of clarity, you feel like you have to do these things, otherwise you may be in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, like I think it's a valid reason to make these choices. It is scary to be in the US and be involved in crypto, but I think like what's become clear is that like if I'm seeing through this, Gary Gensler is seeing through this. Nobody's fooling anyone. Like I think we have this image of regulators being like all dudes who don't understand.
They definitely understand what's happening. Yes,
they understand. Like they've had a long time to figure it out, to be knowledgeable. They are like already knowledgeable about the space. So I don't think like anyone is fooling regulators. And so the point is like, if regulators already know what's going on, then you might as well just build the thing that you need to build.
Then why put on the show if you already know this is not fooling anybody?
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think that it's just a situation we're in where most of these performances, for lack of a better term, fall into that category, but some of them are genuinely trying to do the same things to actually get to a real community? Like, how do you think about sort of them hoping that this is the outcome that they achieve because they have to do it this way versus like just being very upfront and saying, look, this is going to be centralized, or these 10 people are very involved and they're putting 40 hours a week, so we're going to trust their decision to make any future changes over time and then include more people? How much of that do you think is manifestation versus like, oh, I have to kind of repeat this because somebody else repeated it?
I mean, obviously, it's really hard to say the motivations of most people, I think, like maybe some teams are like, okay, we want to get to this point, that, but now we're not, so we'll, kind of say that we are, and because they want to get there, and maybe they're not thinking about regulations. But I don't know, I find that a bit hard to believe. Like in the end, like regulation is this huge looming presence. Everyone's thinking about it, and there's been this consensus that the way to get around regulation is to be fully decentralized, or like sufficiently decentralized has been kind of the meme. But like the reality is that there hasn't been any formal guidance saying that that's the case. So we don't know whether there is some degree of decentralization, regulators are going to be okay with. So again, like,
Yes, I mean, it's a very tough spot to be in if you're starting something and of course, you have no idea what can be effectively held against you or...
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's awful. Like, I think what regulators are doing in the U.S. is awful. I think it's going to set the U.S. back. I was just, hearing how Token 2049, it feels like a bull market, while here it's like maybe...
Yeah, we're all scared to leave the house.
Yeah. So I think like the shift is already happening towards Asia, and it's such a huge loss for the U.S. So I think it's horrible what's happening here. So I think builders in the U.S. shouldn't cave to regulators. Like, again, like, because it's useless. Like, they're seeing through this. So let's just, build for users, like build stuff that it actually makes sense, and not because of what we think that regulators will, and be kind.
Passes some unwritten rule
Yeah.
that we're all worried about. One other kind of unfortunate thing here is that almost all of this, or at least a super majority of it, affects DeFi more than any other community, and that's where most of the opportunities are too, from how we actually make this more accessible as a technology to hundreds of millions of people, if not billions. You already kind of talked about that it effectively is pushing the US back in this whole race. Is there any other practical advice that you have for DeFi founders on what they can do and kind of how they can make this better instead of sort of falling into the trap of repeating things that they think they have to do versus even if they don't agree with them?
No, again, I think it's building for the end user. I'd love to see more applications for maybe for like just like regular mainstream, non-whale person. So
make something for people who are not wealthy already.
Yeah. But I think a lot of it will come. Like I said, I think there's like pieces still missing. Like maybe insurance is a big piece that's missing. Identity is missing. So with DeFi, I think right now, like this kind of musical chairs criticism, I don't think there's much to do about it right now, and I think it's natural for it to be happening because of how early the space is. Right now, the people who can afford to be playing in DeFi or using DeFi need to be super need to have a really high risk appetite because of how unproven the space is. So I think this stage in DeFi is where we test things out, where those who can take risks are, where like all these dApps get battle tested, and then like maybe we graduate from this phase and the space can mature to allow more capital to flow in. So I think kind of all my criticisms, like DeFi musical chairs, I'm the one that's like, okay, I'm less.
Maybe it helps long term. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my kind of final question to you is that we kind of talked about all the four categories there, what we think is not going well. And interestingly, everybody in this room is the audience that ends up being on the other side of those kind of performances. Is there anything that you would want to encourage them to do or not do in the future so that we can actually help correct for this sooner than hoping that all these things happen from top down? What would you like to kind of have them remember as they kind of take away some key points from this discussion?
So, as a user, I think, doing as much research as you can and not just like aping in anything with a high yield is really important. And, I think there's, as like a non-technical person, there's a few things you can do. I think, like a very basic one is just very simply going for the protocols and dApps that have been around the longest. It's just, those have been around the longest and haven't been hacked are probably, safer. Those that have more TVL in them. Look for audits, but that doesn't.
It requires you to have a certain expertise, which is not helpful.
Yeah. And if you are just starting out, I think it's just very simply don't put in more than you can kind of stand to lose. I mean, I think that's the safest way to approach DeFi right now if you're not that experienced. But I think like doing your own research, going for the longest standing, highest TVL protocols to start. And then as you get more experience, maybe start taking on a little bit more risk. And obviously at the Defiant, we are here to provide like all the information, news updates on everything that's going on in DeFi. So subscribing to us helps.
There we go.
In your research.
Read the Defiant so you don't know that something is not on.
And hopefully, this initiative of the DeFi League, this dashboard, I really hope it helps and provides kind of the necessary information and transparency to just, help users make more informed decisions.
I can't wait for DeFi League to be public. So thank you so much for telling us about this early and really appreciate this discussion.